Once upon a time, in a small and quiet village, there lived a kind and smart man named Tommy. He was well known for helping his neighbors and offering wise advice. Everyone in the village admired Tommy, and his days were filled with happiness as he lived peacefully in his little hut by the river. Tommy was a man deeply connected to his family. He had a loving wife, Lara, who stood by his side through all of life's ups and downs. Together, they raised 3 children, who were the pride and joy of Tommy's life. His children, Zaid, Kola, and Timi, brought laughter and love into their home. Tommy cherished every moment spent with them, whether it was teaching them how to fish by the river or sharing stories by the fire at night. Sadie, his eldest daughter, was bright and curious, always asking questions and eager to learn from her father's wisdom. She admired Tommy greatly and dreamed of becoming as wise and helpful as he was to the village. Kola, the middle child, was adventurous and full of energy. He loved exploring the forest and often followed Tommy around, hoping to one day become a strong and brave man like him. Little Timmy, the youngest, was still small but always full of laughter. His playful spirit brought light to their home, and Tommy adored how Timmy could turn even the hardest days into moments of joy. Tommy's wife, Lara, was his biggest support. She was kind and gentle but also strong and full of courage. Lara managed their home with care, making sure that everything ran smoothly while Tommy helped the villagers. She often reminded Tommy of how important his work was, but she also made sure he never forgot the importance of spending time with their family. Tommy and Lara shared a deep love and understanding, and together they built a home filled with love, laughter, and happiness. One evening, after finishing his chores, Tommy sat quietly by the fire, thinking deeply. Life had been good to him, but in his heart he wondered what the future might hold. He knew, like all living things, that one day his time would come and he would have to face death. It was a thought that bothered him, though he tried not to worry too much. The very next morning, Tommy had a visitor. It was the village elder, a wise and respected man who often brought news. But this time, the elder's face looked serious. He sat down with Tommy and spoke in a low voice, telling him something no one ever wants to hear. "Tommy," the elder said, "I have seen in a vision that death is coming for you tomorrow. I advise you to prepare and say goodbye to your family and friends. It is your time." Tommy was shocked. He sat still for a moment, his mind racing. The thought of dying the next day filled him with fear, but he wasn't ready to accept it just yet. Tommy was shocked. He sat still for a moment, his mind racing. The thought of dying the next day filled him with fear, but he wasn't ready to accept it just yet. When Tommy received the news from the village elder that death was coming for him, his heart ached most for his family. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving Lara and the children behind. He had always imagined growing old with Lara, watching their children grow up and have families of their own. The thought of missing out on these precious moments filled him with sadness. It was this love for his family that drove Tommy to seek a way out. He knew that if there was any chance to stay with them longer, he had to take it. That night, as everyone else in the village slept, Tommy decided he wouldn't give up without a fight. He quickly packed a small bag with some food and a few belongings and quietly left the village. His plan was to head into the deep, dark forest where the spirits were said to live. Maybe, just maybe, the spirits could help him escape death. The forest was not far from the village, but it was dense and mysterious. The tall trees blocked out much of the moonlight, and strange sounds filled the air. Tommy walked carefully, feeling the eyes of unseen creatures watching him. He had heard stories of the spirits, both good and bad, who lived in the heart of the forest. But he had no choice. He had to find them. After walking for what felt like hours, Tommy finally reached a glowing shrine deep within the forest. The shrine was old and covered in vines, but it seemed to shine with a magical light. Tommy knelt before the shrine and prayed. "Raise spirit of the forest," he whispered, "please help me. Death is coming for me, but I don't want to leave my family yet. Can you save me?" As soon as he spoke, a soft breeze blew through the trees, and before him, a shimmering figure of light appeared. It was the spirit of the forest. The spirit looked down at Tommy and spoke in a calm and gentle voice. "I cannot stop death forever," the spirit said, "but I will give you a charm. This charm will hide you from death for 1 year. Use this time wisely, Tommy." Tommy's heart filled with hope as the spirit handed him a glowing charm. He thanked the spirit with all his heart and promised to be careful. He placed the charm around his neck and returned home relieved. As the months passed after Tommy received the magic charm from the forest spirit, he cherished every moment with his family even more. He made sure to spend extra time with Sade, helping her with her studies and answering all her questions. He taught Kola how to be brave, showing him how to handle the dangers of the forest. With Timmy, Tommy played and laughed, knowing that these moments of joy were precious and fleeting. Lara, too, noticed the change in Tommy. He seemed more present than Death, who was polite and in no hurry, more attentive and always made time for her and the children. She was grateful for the extra care he showed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was on his mind. Tommy didn't tell his family about the charm, or that Death was after him, not wanting to worry them. He kept it a secret, hoping he could handle the situation on his own. As the year came to an end, and the charm's power began to fade, Tommy's heart grew heavy. He knew his time with his family was running out. He didn't want to leave them, but he also knew that he couldn't escape death forever. Tommy began spending even more time with Lara and the children, making sure to create lasting memories. By the end of the year, the charm was barely glowing at all. Tommy grew worried. He knew that the spirit's magic was running out, and soon death would return to claim him. One quiet evening, Tommy sat by his fire, staring at the now dim charm. He knew that he had only a little time left before death would come. He thought about his life, his family, and all the people he had helped over the years. He wasn't ready to go, but he wasn't sure what more he could do. The next day, just as he had feared, there was a knock on Tommy's door. Slowly he opened it, and there stood Death. Death was calm and patient, dressed in a dark cloak, waiting silently. told me," Death said softly. "It's time to go." Tommy's heart raced, but he quickly thought of a plan. He wasn't ready to give up just yet. Tommy looked around his small hut and saw a large basket in the corner. Without hesitating, he turned to Death and spoke. "Before we go," Tommy said, "could you help me carry this basket? It's very heavy, and I don't think I can manage it alone." Death, who was polite and in no hurry, agreed. "Very well," Death said. "I will help you." Tommy quickly filled the basket with heavy stones from his fireplace and handed it to Death. But as soon as Death tried to lift it, he realized how heavy the basket really was. "This is heavier than I expected," Death grumbled, but he still agreed to help. Together, Tommy and Death lifted the basket and began walking through the forest. As they walked, Tommy started telling stories, trying to distract Death. "Let's walk a little further," Tommy said. "There's something I want to show you just up ahead. It's a beautiful place." Death, though growing impatient, agreed to continue walking. Tommy kept talking, telling Death about his family, his children, and his life in the village. He told jokes, shared funny stories, and kept Death engaged in conversation. Before long, the dark night began to fade, and the first light of dawn appeared in the sky. The golden rays of the rising sun filtered through the trees, lighting up the forest in a warm glow. Tommy smiled as he noticed that Death, who was strongest at night, was beginning to weaken in the daylight. Tommy pointed up at the sky. "Look, Death," he said, "the sun has risen. It's a new day." Death looked at the bright sun and sighed, knowing he had been tricked. "You have fooled me, Tommy," Death said, "but I will return another day." And with that, Death disappeared into the shadows, leaving Tommy standing alone in the forest, relieved and proud of his cleverness. Tommy returned to the village, where word spread quickly about how he had cheated Death. The people celebrated and rejoiced. They danced and cheered his bravery and wisdom. Tommy celebrated, knowing that he had won, at least for now. From that day forward, Tommy became even more respected in the village. He spent his time teaching the village children how to be clever and solve problems. He shared his wisdom with them and reminded them to always think before acting. He told them stories of his adventure with Death, and the children listened with wide eyes, amazed by his courage. Over the years, as Tommy grew older, his bond with his family only deepened. He watched with pride as Zaid grew into a smart and kind young woman, ready to help the village just like her father. Kola, full of energy and strength, became a skilled hunter and protector of the village. And little Timmy, now grown, continued to fill the house with laughter and love. Tommy's greatest joy was seeing his children grow up happy and healthy. He and Lara often sat together in the evenings, watching their children, now young adults, carry on the values and wisdom that Tommy had taught them. They talked about how blessed they were to have had such a full life together, filled with love, family, and community. Years passed, and Tommy grew older. His hair turned gray, and his steps became slower, but he remained happy. He had seen his children grow up, and he had lived a long and full life. One day, as he sat outside his hut, watching his grandchildren play, he knew that his time was near. One quiet afternoon, Death returned just as he had promised. But this time, Death was not in a hurry. He stood at Tommy's door, calm and peaceful. "Tommy," Death said gently, "your time has come. Are you ready?" Tommy, now much older and wiser, smiled. "Yes," he said softly. "I am ready now. Thank you for giving me more time. But please, no trick this time. Let me say my final goodbye." Tommy gathered his family around him and said his goodbyes, telling them how proud he was of each of them. Lara held his hand, tears in her eyes, but a smile on her face, knowing that Tommy had lived a full and happy life. His children, though sad, felt peace knowing their father had been with them for so long. As Tommy left the world, his family continued to live by the values he had taught them: kindness, courage, and wisdom. They passed on his stories to their own children, and the legend of Tommy, the man who once tricked death, lived on for generations.